Hi, welcome back to another book talk. Last week, I talked about the best children's picture books that I thought would be most useful for 2021. And I promised my young adults that this week I'm going to focus on you. So, the first thing that I want to do is to start out with words. These are not my own words. These are words from several different people that I have put together. I could say Grace was a woman with time on her hands, or a white buffalo escaped from memory. But in that dingy light, it was a promise of balance. Opportunity is real and life is free. Equality is in the air we breathe. Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. Bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave, I am the dream and the hope, the one who wears no watch, but who tells the time too truly. These are lines from poems by Joy Harjo, Langston Hughes, Lucille Clifton, Maya Angelou, and Lawrence Ferlinghetti. Words have always been my escape, and that is what I want to offer you for 2021. Never forget the power that you have with words. And the author I have chosen today is one who has used words in order to find herself and save herself. I speak of none other than Margarita Engle, who is a Cuban-American poet, amongst many other things. The first book that I would like to talk about that has to do with her, or is by her, is With a Star in My Hand. Now, With a Star in My Hand is historical fiction about another poet. And this poet's name, he is very famous, but maybe you've never heard of him, is Rubén Darío. Rubén Darío is a very, very famous poet from Nicaragua. And as you can see here, it says poetry hero. And he was also known as the boy poet, for he began writing when he was quite young, even published in newspapers. And he led a very fascinating life, which this takes into account. Doesn't cover his whole life, covers a part of his life. One of the things that I really do enjoy about this book is what it encompasses. I think that Ruben's life very much reflects a lot of lives that people go through. At a young age, for example, he was abandoned, didn't know who his father was, and his mother left. And so he was raised by an uncle and left with many other family members. And one of the lines that really stuck out to me with Margarita's beautiful poetry is, forgiveness is a question I can't answer yet. And this is in regards to what has happened in his life with his family. And I think for a lot of us, we go through some traumatic experiences and some difficult things where someone may ask us for forgiveness. And that is something that requires a lot of deep soul searching. And those are words that can really be difficult to find and to sincerely mean. And that was something that really stuck with me when it came to Rubén. Now, when he was very young, he actually taught himself how to read. And I think that some of us are just born with words that seem to just pour out, and they need to pour out. And that is the case with Rubén. And one of the things I love is that he traveled to different places. He definitely caught the ear and the heart of the masses. And certainly because of that, he also caught the attention of the different rulers of other countries. He didn't let that stop him from speaking out what he felt with the truth. One of my other favorites is lines from here that Margarita wrote is poets must speak. No matter the punishment, we are observers with musical voices, testifying in the courtrooms of nature and human life. How many of you have ever just spoken the truth, regardless of the consequences? And this is, take your time and think about it. This is something that Rubén definitely did, and he certainly got into some trouble for that. Sometimes being banned from certain places, often having to live in poverty. And despite the fact that he was famous, barely being able to survive. And that's something that I have great admiration for when I look at his life. I think there's very few of us, and I'm including myself in this, that would have the kind of courage and bravery that it takes to be able to still speak out the truth, knowing that that is going to impact your life. But he definitely saw that as being a part of his job as a poet, that he is testifying, and that takes great courage. The last thing I want to end with in this book is he says, well, Margarita says for him, that we all have to keep scribbling or our voices will vanish. To me, it is a testament to the power of everyone's voice. However you choose to share it, that if you cease to share it, yeah, it does vanish, right? It does disappear. Now, one thing I did fail to mention, I mentioned Margarita Engle, and that she is Cuban-American. Her mother was born in Cuba, and she, of course, is a poet herself. Her books, many of her books, are written in verse. One of the things I like it is I feel sometimes it's less intimidating to read it. And it feels like you can look at it, right? Yeah, super small, right? Yet there's so much depth to this if you listen to some of the words that I had to say. Like, forgiveness is a question I cannot answer yet. Ooh, that sticks with me. When do you know when it's okay to answer? Yeah, you gotta feel that. And we all have voices, right? We have to all keep scribbling, otherwise that voice will vanish. I don't know about you, but there have been times in my life where I didn't know if I could keep my voice, right? There is a danger in keeping my voice, whether it is scribbling or speaking. And so there's a lot to think about in those lines. And Rubén Darío is, if you've never heard of him, his poetry is definitely something to captivate you. The next two books that I'm going to talk about by Margarita is their memoirs of when she was younger. The very first one is entitled Enchanted Air. Look at all of her bling on the cover. Okay. It was noted as excellence in young adult nonfiction. She was a finalist there for, again, memoir, nonfiction. Yes. Also the Walter, and she won the Pura Belpré Award, which honors, okay, Latino authors. Okay. Enchanted Air, Two Cultures, Two Wings. I mentioned that she is Cuban-American. So her father from this country, she was born here. And what this book really delves into is when she's younger, up until she's 14, and feeling divided between two different places. And I've talked about this before with some other books, that idea of being hyphenated, okay, of having two splits, right, within your culture. And when she is young, she is able to go and spend her summers with, her abuelo, her great grandmother, her tío, all of these cousins in this rich and beautiful place, this tropical island. And it is so vastly different than where she lives in California. And they do move frequently up and down in California in different places. And she is split, right? Like she knows English, but she also knows Spanish. And she imagines herself like a twin, right? If I lived here, this is where my twin would be. I would be much more bold. I would dance, yeah, when the vendors would come to sell things. There's certainly a different culture involved. And so she, in many ways, feels herself split in two. And I think that this quote really from the book very much represents who she is and how this starts. Two countries, two families, two sets of words. Am I free to need both? Or will I always have to choose only one way of thinking? I was very blessed to grow up in a place where many of my loved ones and dear friends were very much feeling in that way. Two sets of words, two countries, two families. And I think that idea and that feeling, which pervades throughout this book, is one that is common for a lot of Americans. And not just Americans, I think, in other places in this world. And it's one of the things that I really, really loved about Enchanted Air is Margarita as a young girl exploring and enjoying things. When she's here in America, she's sort of like this bookworm, and she loves to read and she loves to explore like through her imagination. She's very studious. Then when she's on the island, she explores like physically, right? She likes to go into nature. Books, she doesn't really stay closeted up with books. She's learning new things, riding a horse, hearing the stories of her family. It's new, it's different, it's a different Margarita. And but something ends up happening. Yeah. So for those of you who are unaware, the status of diplomatic relations between America and Cuba, there is a falling out, yes? And this happens during her childhood. And so there's the summers when she gets to go, and suddenly things happen. And you get this really wonderful perspective of what it's like to be Cuban-American during the time when Cuba should not exist. And for many people, that's how they feel here in America. You have the missile crisis, and everything that follows after in the Cold War. And suddenly, that part of her is physically cut. You discover what it is as you go along her journey to be who she is, and to try and hold on to that. One of the most profound parts of one of Margarita's poems is certain longings are shared by all. There's this sense of, for me, of unification, of what it means to be human, of what it means to love. Sometimes I think in political climates and social climates, we forget that there is something that unites all of us. And this is a beautiful book to remind us what that is. The next book that I want to share continues Margarita's journey in her second part memoir, Soaring Earth. You don't need have read one to have the other, for each one is complete into itself. I read one right after the other, and I'm very glad that I did. This takes off right when she's 14 all the way up through her college years. And for me, I really feel like if I had read this when I was a young adult, when I was a teenager, this would have been like such a blessing. Um, Margarita is not perfect. I mean, this is one of the things I really appreciate. Thank you, Margarita. I mentioned, oh, she's a bookworm, all these things. And you learn how she loves to scribble and how to write poems. But this is also the 60s, okay? So we're talking, civil rights movement. We're talking Vietnam. And she is not, I mean, after her experiences with what happened with Cuba and people have the violence and everything else that happened there, she is like, I'm the hippie generation. Make love, not war. She is not a part of any of those things. And it terrifies her. This idea of falling in love with somebody that might be shipped over to Vietnam, all of those sorts of things that are happening. At the same time, while she might want to protest, she also doesn't want to see violence either. And so there's all of these different things that are happening around her. And she certainly has friends. I mean, the drug scene is there. It's not like she doesn't try, okay? But that's not her thing either. There's, in many ways, words save her, okay? But she isn't immune to what is happening around her because she has friends that are doing these sorts of things. And all of it feels very, very real because she's also trying to discover herself. And one of the quotes that I really do love in this too is she says, "What do I crave more?" And it's in relation, she's at Berkeley at this point, okay? And Berkeley, for those of you who don't know, in the 60s is like the hub of protesting, okay? And so she asks, what do I crave more, rebellion or communication? And in reference to this, she's studying a language. And so it would be skipping her class in order to go to protest. But I think of that line in such a bigger sense. What do I crave more? Rebellion or communication? And I just think of what those words mean too. I think especially when I was younger, I rebelled against everything. Not that I was necessarily exposed to the same things as Margarita, because we all have our own journeys. But if you ask my mother, she will still say, I would argue over anything. If you said the sky was not blue, I find a reason to argue with you. And I think one of the number one things my mother tried to teach me was when to pick, right, my fights. And I think about the idea of rebellion and the idea of communication. And what is it that I crave more, right? Making things right, trying to understand other people. And of course, I'm extrapolating those ideas, but I think we all do as readers when we read something. But it's one of the things that I thought about often when I was reading this part of her life, is what is it that she wants? And a lot of times when I read Margarita's journey, I think that she's trying to discover so much of herself. She calls herself often the wanderer. She's homeless at times. I won't give away other things in the story because I think it's important to understand. And I also think that for a lot of us, when we are young, when we graduate high school, we don't necessarily know what path we're going to take. And we wander and look for it. And this is a great book to experience and to understand that you're not alone. Many of us have that experience too. One of the other things I like is that we start in her first book, in Enchanted Air, right? Where she feels separate, right? The two identities. And in this book, there's another quote that I feel is such a healing one, where she says, identity is always such a personal blend of inheritance and surroundings. And that really made me pause and made me think, because we do form who we are, right? By what we get from what we inherit, right? From those who have come before us, but also by where we are, right? By the journey that we participate in our environment. And I feel like that's so important to understand, because none of us come from the same place. Even if we grew up in the same neighborhood, the same town, we're all going to have different experiences, and our identity is going to be different because of that. So Soaring Earth, you're going to love it if you start with Margarita's journey. And it's going to offer you hope. And in all of her books, nature is a really prevalent theme. And so if you are a lover of nature, Margarita herself is too. I think you will enjoy these. So let me go back with the first one. So all by Margarita Engle, with a star in my hand. Okay, and that is about Rubén Darío. And then Enchanted Air, Two Cultures, Two Wings. The first memoir, and then a companion memoir, Soaring Earth. Then the last thing that I want to share with you. That's for you. Don't forget that you have words. I'm not saying go out and be a poet, unless that's what you want to be. But remember that your own words have power. And it's one of the things that I love about Margarita, because there's a point in her life when she feels she cannot find the words. And it's the same with Rubén. But it's important that you recognize in 2021 that the things that you see, the things that you hear, and the things that you experience have value. And you should share them. However you choose. Maybe it is words, maybe it is music, maybe it's pictures. But whatever it is, what you have, what your journey is, has value. And I hope that you find a way to express it so that you can remember where you are. With that being said, I wish you good health, good reading. Thanks.